to Up Gourmet. My name is Chad, and I'm going to walk you through basically how you can get the most out of your Shiitake mushroom grow kit. These are the new grow kits from Up Gourmet Foods. You can find these at a lot of the local, grocery stores, greenhouses, online. So first things first, I'm just going to open up the box and we'll take a look and see what we got inside. So inside this kit, it has a QR code. So that QR code is going to take you probably to this video. So if you've already found the QR code, you're a step in the right direction. So inside we got our bag, which has our spray bottle. It has our humidity tent, and then the skewers for holding up the humidity tent. It also has a rubber band, but that rubber band is generally used for some of the other grow kits like the lion's mane or the shiitake, lion's mane or oysters, because you keep the bag on for that one. Okay, so we're going to remove our block, and this should be a fully colonized block of Shiitake mycelium. If you see things pinning on it, like if you see small mushrooms already forming, then basically all you're going to want to do is remove any of the parts that are already fruiting, so that because if some of those might not grow as well, or they might have started to abort and different things. So if you have any mushrooms fruiting inside the bag, just remove those mushrooms and start from scratch. Morning.
Happy Friday.
Is it Friday already?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so first thing we'll just remove the rubber band. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to cut the bag completely off of this block, because we're going to fruit it out just like this. We're going to fruit it out with no bag attached to it on this one. So the simplest way I like to do that is I take alcohol and I'll spray down basically everything that I'm using, just to make sure that this is clean and sterile, because inside this bag, this is a sterile environment already. So we just want to make sure we don't introduce anything into that sterile environment, which may cause, other fungi to grow or try to compete with the fungi on this block. So I'm just going to make a small incision, or just basically cut all the way around the block. Simple as that. You can just take it off in 2 sections then. Open it up. Pop the bag right off. And this is compostable plastic. Actually, I should say it's biodegradable, oxy-biodegradable, so the sun and the heat actually degrade this plastic into small enough pieces to where it can then be digested by either worms or other fungi. So that can go in the compost, or if it goes into the landfill, it'll just break down much easier. So I like to clean my hands anytime I'm handling any of these mushroom blocks, just to make sure that we don't transfer any type of fungi onto this medium. So I'm just going to clean this block up a little bit. I'm just going to remove any pieces that are kind of extra. If there's any mushrooms or any debris that's kind of hanging off this block, we'll just kind of pick some of those off, remove some of the excess on the bottom, and compost that away. So really all you're going to need to grow these shiitakes is open this bag up. And we're going to want to tent this whole bag, we're going to want to tent this whole block to make sure, because it's going to fruit out all the way around it, just like this. You're going to get mushrooms fruiting out basically from all angles. So inside your humidity tent, or your humidity tent should have the corners cut off of it already, just like that. If it doesn't, you just want to take a little scissors and snip the corners just to make sure you get proper airflow inside this humidity tent. So I'm going to take these skewers and I'm just going to basically poke one in each corner just enough to hold the bag up, just to give it some room for the mushrooms to grow. And so we're gonna go just like that. Sometimes I like to give it a little extra spray of water. I don't have water in my spray bottle right now, but take your spray bottle and spray a little bit of water inside your humidity tent so it's ready to go. And all you're gonna do is place your humidity tent right over the top of the block. Just like this. I like to kind of set it on a plate or something like that, because generally you're gonna get humidity is gonna build up inside of here and it's gonna kind of run down. So if you have an extra plate, or you can just tuck it underneath like this, that also works. So you can tuck it underneath like that. And then you can set that right on your countertop. Somewhere, you definitely want to keep it have some light, because the mushrooms do produce vitamin D2 when in the presence of the sunlight, like ambient sunlight. So you definitely want your mushrooms in some light. They grow best when they have some light. You're not going to want to put it in a dark closet or anywhere like that. Basically right in this open area like you see here, could be, next to a window that doesn't really get a lot of direct sunlight. You're not going to want this to dry out, and you're not really going to want it to be in really hot direct sunlight. So somewhere in direct sunlight, in a temperature range for fruiting out these shiitakes is going to be best between 55 and I would say 70. Don't really go much higher than 70, 72. When you get up into that warmer temperature range, your mushrooms are going to fruit out much faster, and you're going to have a shorter window to catch them and harvest them. So you might say, oh, well, that mushroom was really good one day, come back to the next day and you realize that it's already, should have been harvested. And that just basically has to do with the warmer temperatures. They grow much faster when it's warmer. So if you keep them at a colder temperature, you generally have a little bit better of mushroom quality. So you're gonna want to spray this tent, I would say at least a couple times a day. Just make sure it doesn't dry out. The whole purpose of this tent is just to make sure that your mushrooms, when they start fruiting, that they don't dry out. Because if they start pinning and they start fruiting and they don't have enough moisture, then you're going to get aborted mushrooms and they aren't going to grow properly. So you just want to make sure there's enough moisture in this tent to make sure you get a proper flush. So on your first flush, you're going to get a whole lot of mushrooms just like this. Basically the block is going to erupt on all sides, and you're going to get a whole bunch of beautiful little mushrooms. I preferably like to pick them when their caps are still just slightly rolled in. Basically it means that the mushroom hasn't started to produce its spores yet, so it hasn't started to break down. Once the mushroom produces its spores, it's basically, that's its life cycle. It's just made to produce spores. So as soon as it starts to produce spores, then the mushroom starts to degrade and it's not as good a quality. So if you can get the mushroom when the caps are just slightly curled in on the bottom, that's actually the best and most harvest time. So this block is actually perfectly ready to harvest. So I've been getting a lot of questions about second flushes on your shiitakes. So this block right here is a version of what it might look like when you get a second flush. So you're going to get a lot less mushrooms on your second flush, and you're going to get a much larger mushroom. So this mushroom, when it grows, is going to be about this big around. So instead of having a bunch of small ones, you're going to get basically a few large ones. And you're going to want to rehydrate these blocks in between flushes. So one of the best ways that you can rehydrate this, so after you harvest all your mushrooms, you're going to want to let this block sit and go through. So take the grow tent off of it, remove the stakes, and basically let it sit like this, just like a block like that, in the open air, and let it dry out for a few days. I would say maybe 2-3 days. Just let the block kind of go through a slight resting period. After it's done with that like 2 or 3 day resting period, then you're gonna want to take and you're gonna want to submerge this block to rehydrate it. So the best way that I've found to rehydrate that is just to take a 5-gallon bucket, take your block, put your block in the bottom of the bucket, and find something heavy to put on top of it to hold it underneath the water. So I just have a brick and a pan, so I'm gonna put that like that. I'll set it in there, and now this is ready to be filled with water. So I'll just fill this bucket on the bottom with enough water to cover that block. We'll let the block sit overnight. Once the block is sat overnight, I would say 12 hours. Probably don't go too much into the 24-hour range. I would stay right around 12, 14 hours is probably ideal, because the block will start to turn really mushy if it goes too much longer than that. So you can kind of get a feel for it. Check on it periodically just to make sure the block has started to rehydrate. It's nice and wet, it's nice and heavy, but it's not getting too spongy. So when the block is completely rehydrated and you can take it out, you can remove any excess debris that looks like it may be not part of the main organism, because anything that is not contained in the main organism is going to be a spot where other fungi are going to try to grow. So just to limit the amount of other growth of other fungi that are trying to grow on this substrate, just remove any areas that are not attached. Like here's a little area that's, and you're going to want to remove any of the excess debris from the old mushrooms. So if there's little stubs of stem pieces or anything that's left on this block, you're going to want to remove as much of that as possible. So you can see here we've removed a lot of the top on this one because there was a lot of mushrooms that fruited out. So we remove as much of that as possible, and then this block is ready to be fruited a second time. The best way to have good success with getting a second flush out of your shiitakes is going to be cleanliness. So you're going to want to make sure that all your environment is super clean. Make sure your hands are clean. Wipe down your area where you're using, where you're going to be putting your block. Even if your bag has some spores in it, I would recommend wiping that bag out as well. So you can take one of these bags, you can wipe it out, wipe the inside, wipe down the skewers, just clean everything as much as possible, and that's going to give you the best way to get multiple flushes off of these shiitake blocks. Like I said, each time you fruit this block out, you're going to get a little bit less mushrooms, and the mushrooms are going to be larger. And generally we'll see probably 3 flushes off of these if they're taken care of properly. Once the block has basically exhausted its energy, it's going to be a lot easier for other competitive fungi to start to grow on that block. You can continue to remove any of the other parts where other fungi are continuing to grow on that and continue to try to get a second flush. But pretty much if you get 3 flushes off of it, you're doing really good. Once the block is basically spent, you can still use the mycelium to inoculate outdoor logs or totems or anything you want to experiment with like that. It also makes really good organic compost. So, the nutrients inside this block from the mycelium, from the added nutrients that we add to the block, and once it starts to break down, it's just great nitrogen for the garden. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us, and happy growing. Thanks.